The dashboard clock glowed 12:47 a.m. when I opened my eyes. My neck screamed from sleeping against the steering wheel, and my mouth tasted like someone had stuffed it with cotton balls soaked in regret. The first thing I noticed wasn't the pain or the confusion. It was the note tucked under my windshield wiper, fluttering in the night breeze like a white flag of surrender. I'm Eddie Hartwell, 42 years old, facilities manager at Blackstone Industries, and apparently the kind of guy who wakes up abandoned in the middle of nowhere with no memory of how he got there. The note was written in block letters on company letterhead. Toughen up while your wife gets her promotion. Real classy. I sat there for a moment, letting the words sink in. Melissa's promotion. The one she'd been chasing for months, working late nights, taking weekend trips, being mysteriously unavailable whenever I called. The promotion that required her to spend so much time with her boss, Ronald Clay, and that slick HR director, Chad Morrison. My hand shook as I started the engine. The gas tank showed nearly empty, and I was somewhere deep in the Pine Ridge Forest, about 20 miles outside our little company town of Millbrook. Someone had driven me out here, left me to wake up alone, and wanted me to know exactly why. The drive home gave me plenty of time to think. Melissa had been different lately, colder, more distant, always checking her phone and smiling at messages she wouldn't share. When I'd ask about her day, she'd give me one-word answers and change the subject. Last week, I'd found a hotel receipt in her purse from the Riverside Inn downtown. When I asked about it, she claimed it was for a client meeting. But Blackstone Industries doesn't put up employees at local hotels. We all live within 30 miles of the office. I pulled into our driveway at 1:30 a.m. The house was dark except for a single light in our bedroom window. Melissa's car sat in the garage, but parked on the street was a black BMW I recognized, Ronald Clay's company car. My wife was home, with her boss, at 1:30 in the morning. Before we deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible Reddit stories. I sat in my truck for 10 minutes, watching that bedroom light, feeling something cold and hard settle in my chest. Not anger exactly, something worse. Clarity. The front door was unlocked. I slipped inside, kicked off my boots, and crept toward the stairs. Voices drifted down from the bedroom, Melissa's laugh, low and intimate, followed by a man's chuckle I'd heard countless times at company meetings. I pressed myself against the wall at the bottom of the staircase, straining to hear. He's probably still out there, Melissa was saying, wandering around the woods like a lost puppy. Chad did good work, Ronald replied. Your husband won't be bothering us anymore. Not after tonight. What if he goes to the police? And tells them what? That he woke up in his own car with a note. Eddie's been acting erratic for months. Everyone at the office has noticed. If he starts making accusations, we'll just say he's having a breakdown. Their laughter made my stomach turn. I backed away from the stairs and slipped out the front door, my mind racing. They'd planned this. Chad Morrison, our head of HR, had somehow gotten me out to those woods, and Melissa, my wife of 15 years, was in on it. I drove to Murphy's Bar on the east side of town, where my friend Lisa worked late shifts. The parking lot was nearly empty, just a few regulars nursing their problems in the dim light of beer signs and broken dreams. Lisa took one look at me and poured a double whiskey without being asked. She was 42 like me, divorced, and ran Murphy's with the kind of no-nonsense attitude that came from dealing with drunks and losers for 20 years. You look like hell, Eddie. What happened? I told her everything, the woods, the note, the voices upstairs. Lisa listened without interrupting, occasionally refilling my glass. So what are you going to do? She asked when I finished. I don't know. Confront them? Get a lawyer? Eddie, listen to me. These people aren't playing fair. Ronald Clay owns half this town, and Chad Morrison controls who gets hired and fired at the biggest employer for 50 miles. If you go at them straight on, they'll destroy you. Then what do you suggest? Lisa smiled, and there was something predatory in her expression. You want to win? Play dirty. They think they're smarter than you, but they're not. They're just richer and more connected. Use that against them. I finished my drink and stood up. How? Information, Eddie. These people can't help bragging about their schemes. Find out what they're really planning, get proof, and then hit them where it hurts. I drove home at 3 a.m. Ronald's car was gone, and the house was quiet. I slipped into the guest bedroom where I'd been sleeping for the past month, another red flag I'd ignored, and lay awake until dawn, planning. The next morning, Melissa acted like nothing had happened. She made coffee, kissed my cheek, and asked if I'd slept well. Fine, I said. How was your evening? Quiet. Went to bed early. She didn't even blink when she lied. At work, I went through the motions of my job, checking HVAC systems, coordinating with maintenance crews, making sure the Blackstone Industries building ran smoothly. But my real focus was on gathering intelligence. I had access to every room in the building, security cameras, executive offices, conference rooms. I knew the layout better than anyone, and I knew where people went when they thought they were alone. During lunch, I slipped into Ronald's office while he was at a client meeting. His computer was password protected, but he'd written his login information on a sticky note hidden under his keyboard. Amateur. His email revealed nothing immediately useful, but his calendar showed something interesting, a weekend retreat at his lakehouse, scheduled for this coming Saturday. The guest list included Melissa, Chad, and several other executives. I planted a small voice recorder under his desk, the kind used for dictation, barely bigger than a thumb drive. Then I did the same in Chad's office and the main conference room. That evening, I checked our joint credit card statements online. Melissa had been busy, dinners at expensive restaurants, purchases at Victoria's Secret, a charge for something called Romantic Getaways, Inc. My wife was planning a romantic getaway, just not with me. I was still at the computer when Melissa came home from her late meeting. She looked flushed and happy, her lipstick slightly smudged. Working late? She asked, glancing at the screen. Just paying bills, I said. Noticed some interesting charges. For just a moment, her mask slipped. I saw fear in her eyes before she recovered. Oh, those. Girls' night out with Jennifer and the others. You know how it is. Another lie. Jennifer had moved to Phoenix 6 months ago. That night, I lay in the guest bed listening to Melissa talk on her phone in the next room. She kept her voice low, but I caught fragments. He's getting suspicious. Need to move faster. This weekend at the lake. I smiled in the darkness. They thought they were so clever, but they were about to learn something about Eddie Hartwell. I might be a blue-collar guy from the wrong side of town, but I'd spent 4 years in the Army before coming home to marry my high school sweetheart and work my way up from janitor to facilities manager. I knew how to plan an operation. And I knew how to win. The Blackstone Industries annual awards dinner was held at the Millbrook Country Club, the kind of place where the steaks cost more than most people make in a day, and the waiters look down on anyone who doesn't know which fork to use for the salad course. I wore my best suit, the one I'd bought for our wedding anniversary 3 years ago, and tried to blend in with the executives and their wives. Melissa looked stunning in a black dress that probably cost more than my monthly salary. She worked the room like a politician, laughing at jokes that weren't funny, and touching arms in that way women do when they want to seem connected and important. I watched from the bar as she and Chad Morrison stood close together near the dessert table, their heads bent in intimate conversation. Chad was 35, tall and lean with the kind of artificial confidence that comes from never having been punched in the face. He wore a perfectly tailored suit and a smile that made me want to wipe it off with a crowbar. Eddie Hartwell, Ronald Clay's voice boomed across the room. There's our facilities hero, the man who keeps our toilets flushing and our lights burning. A few people chuckled. Ronald was 50-something with silver hair and the kind of tan that comes from golf courses and yacht clubs. He'd inherited his position from his father, and treated the company like his personal kingdom. Someone has to do the real work, I replied, forcing a smile. Absolutely. We need our blue-collar heroes. Speaking of which, how's that promotion application coming along? Still hoping to move up to management? I'd submitted an application for a supervisor position 6 months ago. It had been buried in HR ever since. Still waiting to hear back. Well, these things take time. We have to make sure we're promoting the right people, you understand? People who can handle the pressure, who won't crack under stress. His eyes glittered with malicious amusement. Behind him, I could see Chad and Melissa watching our conversation with barely concealed smirks. Of course, I said. Wouldn't want to promote someone who might have a breakdown. Ronald's smile faltered slightly. Exactly. Glad you understand. I excused myself and headed for the restroom, but instead of going inside, I slipped down the hallway toward the kitchen. The country club's service corridors were a maze I'd learned to navigate during my years maintaining their equipment. I found a spot where I could hear the main dining room through a service window. Melissa's voice carried clearly. Did you see his face? I almost felt sorry for him. Don't, Chad replied. He brought this on himself. If he'd just accepted his place, none of this would be necessary. When are you going to tell him about the promotion? Monday morning. We'll call it a performance review. By the time I'm done with him, he'll be lucky to keep his job, let alone get promoted. And the other thing? All arranged. After this weekend at the lake, he won't be a problem anymore. I pressed closer to the window, straining to hear more, but they'd moved away. My hands were shaking with rage, but I forced myself to stay calm. Information was power, and I was finally getting the intelligence I needed. I slipped back to the dining room just as Ronald was beginning his keynote speech about excellence in leadership and rewarding those who demonstrate true commitment to the company vision. He talked about the importance of loyalty and trust, all while my wife sat at the head table next to Chad, their hands almost touching on the white tablecloth. After dinner, I followed Melissa to the parking lot. She was walking with Jennifer's replacement, a young woman named Tracy who worked in accounting. I can't believe you're really going through with this, Tracy was saying. It's not like I have a choice, Melissa replied. Eddie's been holding me back for years. This promotion will change everything. But leaving him like this, it seems cruel. He'll survive. Men like Eddie always do. They find some other woman to take care of them and pretend they're the victim. Tracy looked uncomfortable. What about Jake? Your son won't understand. Jake's 17. He'll be in college next year. He doesn't need to be dragged down by his father's failures. I stood frozen behind a pillar, listening to my wife discuss our son like he was a piece of furniture to be moved or discarded. Jake was a good kid, a little rebellious maybe, but smart and decent. The idea that she'd use him as a pawn in whatever game she was playing made my anger turn into something colder and more focused. I waited until they drove away, then went home to find Jake in the living room playing video games. How was the fancy dinner? He asked without looking up from his screen. Educational. Your mother's working late again? When isn't she? There was bitterness in his voice that I'd never heard before. She said something about a weekend trip, business stuff. What do you think about that? Jake paused his game and looked at me directly for the first time in weeks. I think Mom's been acting weird, and I think you're pretending not to notice. Smart kid. Too smart for his own good. What would you say if I told you I was thinking about making some changes? Like what kind of changes? The kind where your old man stops being such a pushover. Jake smiled, and for a moment he looked like the little boy who used to help me fix things in the garage. About time, Dad. About time. That night, I retrieved the voice recorders I'd planted around the office. The one in Ronald's office had captured a conversation between him and Chad about the Eddie problem and how they planned to neutralize the situation permanently during their weekend retreat. The recorder from the conference room was even better. It had picked up a meeting between Melissa, Chad, and someone from the legal department discussing a restraining order and something called involuntary commitment proceedings. They weren't just planning to fire me. They were planning to have me declared mentally unstable. I sat in my garage workshop until 3 a.m., listening to the recordings and planning my response. These people thought they were playing chess while I was playing checkers. They were about to learn that sometimes the best strategy is to flip over the board and start a completely different game. By morning, I had a plan. It wasn't nice, it wasn't fair, and it definitely wasn't legal in some of the finer details. But it would work. And when I was done, everyone in Millbrook would know exactly who Melissa Hartwell really was. Monday morning came with the kind of gray drizzle that makes everything look like a crime scene waiting to happen. I arrived at the office early, before the executives started their daily parade of self-importance, and made my way to the security office. Tommy Briggs worked the morning shift, a decent guy who'd been laid off from the steel plant and needed this job to keep his house. We'd shared enough coffee breaks for me to know he had no love for the management types who treated him like furniture. "Eddie, what brings you down here so early?" "Need a favor, Tommy. I think someone's been messing with my office. Could you pull the security footage from last Friday afternoon?" Tommy frowned. "What kind of messing?" "Files moved around, computer tampered with. Probably nothing, but I want to be sure." He pulled up the footage on his monitor. We watched Chad Morrison enter my office at 4:30 p.m., spend 10 minutes going through my desk drawers, and plant something in my filing cabinet. "Well, I'll be damned," Tommy muttered. "What do you think he was doing?" "Planting evidence to get me fired, most likely." "Can you make me a copy of this?" Tommy hesitated. "Eddie, if this gets out, I could lose my job." "If this doesn't get out, I definitely will. And after they're done with me, how long do you think it'll be before they decide the security department needs restructuring?" He made me a copy. At 9 a.m. sharp, Chad called me to his office for my performance review. I brought a notepad and my best confused employee expression. "Eddie, we need to discuss some concerns about your recent performance," Chad began, consulting a folder thick with official-looking documents. "What kind of concerns?" "Several people have reported that you've been acting erratically, missing meetings, showing up late, seeming distracted and hostile." "I haven't missed any meetings, and I'm never late." "We also have reports of you accessing areas of the building outside your normal duties. The executive floor, specifically." "I maintain the HVAC systems on every floor. That's literally my job." Chad smiled the way a snake might smile if snakes could smile. "Eddie, I think you're under a lot of stress at home. Maybe it would be better if you took some time off, got some help." "What kind of help?" "Professional help, counseling. There are excellent facilities that specialize in workplace stress and adjustment disorders." There it was. The setup. They wanted me committed to a mental health facility, which would give them grounds to fire me and make any accusations I made seem like the ravings of an unstable person. "I appreciate the concern," I said carefully, "but I'm feeling fine. Maybe we should focus on my actual work performance." Chad opened the folder and pulled out a photograph. Me, apparently breaking into a supply closet that had been reported as vandalized last week. Except I'd never been near that supply closet. The photograph had been doctored, my face pasted onto someone else's body with enough skill to fool a casual observer, but not a forensic examination. "We found these items in your office filing cabinet," Chad continued, producing a bag of expensive tools that had gone missing from the maintenance shop. The same filing cabinet I'd watched him plant evidence in on Friday afternoon. "Those aren't mine," I said. "Eddie, please, this is difficult for everyone. If you cooperate, we can handle this quietly. A medical leave of absence, some treatment, and maybe we can work something out. And if I don't cooperate, then we'll have to involve the police. Theft of company property is a serious crime." I pretended to consider this, letting my shoulders slump as if I was defeated. "Can I have some time to think about it?" "Of course. But Eddie, don't take too long, and don't do anything rash. People are watching out for you, but they can only help if you let them." I left his office with my head down and my hands shaking, partly from rage, partly from the adrenaline rush of knowing I had them exactly where I wanted them. That afternoon, I called in sick and drove to the next town over, where I had a friend who ran a small printing shop. Danny owed me a favor from when I'd helped him move his equipment during his divorce, and he didn't ask questions when I requested some special printing jobs. By evening, I had 500 flyers with Chad Morrison's face on them, along with some very interesting information about his personal life that I'd gleaned from his social media accounts and public records. Information about his gambling debts, his 2 previous harassment complaints that had been quietly settled, and his habit of using company resources for personal projects. I also had a special batch of business cards printed up for Ronald Clay, with his real home address and cell phone number, advertising services that he definitely didn't provide. Wednesday night, I waited until 2 a.m. and then took a drive through the nicest neighborhoods in town. Chad's BMW was parked in his driveway, gleaming under the streetlights like a symbol of everything I'd never had and never wanted. I didn't touch his car. I didn't key the paint or slash the tires or any of the obvious things he'd expect. Instead, I carefully placed my flyers under the windshield wipers of every car on his street, along with the cars in the parking lots of his gym, his country club, and his favorite restaurants. By Thursday morning, half the town knew that Chad Morrison was a gambling addict who'd been accused of harassment and was currently under investigation for embezzlement. None of it was technically true, but all of it was plausible enough to make people wonder. I did the same thing to Ronald Clay, except his flyers went to his church, his golf course, and the private school where his daughter was a student. Ronald's flyers focused on his creative accounting practices and his habit of using company funds for personal vacations. Friday morning, I showed up to work early and went straight to Tommy's security office. "You hear about all the excitement?" Tommy asked with a grin. "What excitement?" "Chad Morrison's been getting phone calls all morning. Seems someone's been spreading stories about him around town. Ronald Clay, too. They're both madder than wet cats." "Any idea who might have done such a thing?" "Not a clue. But whoever it was, they sure know how to hit where it hurts." At 10 a.m., Chad called me back to his office. This time, Ronald was there too, and neither of them looked happy. "We know it was you," Chad said without preamble. "Know what was me?" "The flyers. The lies. The character assassination." I looked genuinely confused. "I'm sorry. I don't know what you're talking about. I've been home sick for 2 days." "Cut the act, Eddie. This has your fingerprints all over it." "Actually, it doesn't," I replied, "because I didn't do anything. But I'm curious. Why would you assume I did? Have you been doing something that might make someone want to spread stories about you?" Ronald leaned forward. "Listen carefully, you little worm. We're done playing games. You have until Monday to submit your resignation, or we'll have you arrested for theft and vandalism. And if I don't resign, then you'll find out what happens to people who mess with their betters." I stood up slowly, letting my mask slip just enough for them to see the real Eddie Hartwell underneath, the guy who'd spent 4 years in the Army learning how to handle bullies and thugs. "Is that a threat, Mr. Clay?" "It's a promise." I smiled. "Good. I like promises. They're so much more satisfying when they get broken." I walked out of the office, leaving them staring after me. In the hallway, I passed Melissa, who was carrying a stack of files toward Ronald's office. She wouldn't meet my eyes. That evening, I sat Jake down for a serious conversation. "Son, things are going to get complicated around here for a while. Your mother and I are having some problems." "I figured. She's been acting like she doesn't live here anymore." "How would you feel about staying with your Aunt Carol for a few weeks, just until things settle down?" Jake studied my face carefully. "Dad, are you planning something?" "I'm planning to stop being a victim. Sometimes that requires a person to make some hard choices." "Will you be okay?" I ruffled his hair. "I'll be fine, son. Your old man's tougher than he looks." After Jake left for his aunt's house, I sat in my workshop and made final preparations for the weekend. Melissa was leaving Saturday morning for the lakehouse retreat, along with Chad and Ronald and several other executives. They thought they were going to spend the weekend planning my destruction. Instead, they were going to learn what destruction actually looked like. Saturday morning arrived with the kind of crisp autumn air that makes everything seem possible. I watched from the kitchen window as Melissa loaded her overnight bag into her car, checking her phone every few seconds like a teenager heading to prom. She came back inside to grab her coffee, and for a moment we stood in the same room like strangers waiting for a bus. "I'll be back Sunday evening," she said without looking at me. "Have fun at your work retreat." "It's not fun, Eddie. It's business." "Right. Business." She paused at the door. "Maybe we should talk when I get back. About us, I mean." "Maybe we should." After she left, I gave her a 30-minute head start, then loaded my truck with everything I'd need for the weekend: camping gear, the good camera with the telephoto lens, extra batteries for my voice recorders, and a few other items that would come in handy. Ronald Clay's lakehouse was about an hour north of town, a sprawling cedar and glass monument to inherited wealth perched on the shores of Lake Millfield. I'd been there once before, for a company picnic, and remembered the layout well enough to plan my approach. I parked my truck at a public boat launch 2 miles down the shore and hiked through the woods, staying well back from the waterline. The autumn foliage provided perfect cover, and my years of hunting with my father had taught me how to move quietly through the forest. By noon, I was positioned on a ridge overlooking the house, with a clear view of the main deck and the floor-to-ceiling windows that made up the entire back wall. Through my camera's telephoto lens, I could see into the living room where my wife, her boss, and her lover were having drinks and laughing at jokes I couldn't hear. I settled in to wait and watch. The first interesting conversation happened around 2 p.m., when Ronald and Chad stepped onto the deck to smoke cigars. I couldn't hear them from my position, but I'd anticipated this problem. Earlier that morning, I'd snuck down to the house and planted voice recorders in several strategic locations, including one attached to the underside of the deck railing. While they smoked and talked, I used my camera to document everything. Ronald gesturing expansively as he outlined some plan. Chad nodding and taking notes on his phone. Both of them looking pleased with themselves in the way that predators look when they're discussing their next meal. Around 4 p.m., Melissa joined them on the deck, and their body language shifted into something more intimate. Chad put his arm around her waist. Ronald refilled her wine glass. She laughed at something Chad whispered in her ear, then kissed him full on the mouth, while Ronald watched with obvious approval. I took pictures of everything. As evening approached, I made my way down to the house to retrieve the voice recorders. The conversations I'd captured were even better than I'd hoped. Ronald's voice, clear and confident. "After Monday, Eddie Hartwell won't be a problem anymore. The commitment papers are already prepared, 2 signatures from licensed psychiatrists, and he'll be locked up for a mandatory 72-hour evaluation." Chad's response, "And the psychiatrists?" "Both on our payroll. Dr. Henderson owes me money, and Dr. Martinez depends on our company's employee assistance program for half his income. They'll sign whatever we put in front of them." Melissa's voice, colder than I'd ever heard it. "What about Jake? He won't understand why his father just disappeared." Ronald, "Jake's 17. In 6 months, he'll be legally an adult, and none of this will matter. Besides, once we have Eddie committed, it'll be easy to prove he's an unfit parent. You'll get full custody, and the boy will thank you for protecting him from his father's mental illness." Chad, "And after the commitment?" Ronald, "Depends how cooperative Eddie is. If he agrees to a quiet divorce and signs away his parental rights, maybe he gets released after a few months. If he keeps causing problems..." A pause. "Well, there are facilities that specialize in long-term care for difficult patients. They were planning to have me declared insane and locked away indefinitely. My wife, the woman I'd loved since high school, was helping them plan it. I sat in the darkness outside their stolen paradise, listening to them destroy my life with the casual efficiency of accountants balancing a ledger, and felt something fundamental shift inside me. The last traces of the man who'd tried to play fair, who'd believed in working hard and treating people with respect, crumbled away like old paint. What emerged underneath was harder and colder and infinitely more dangerous. I spent the rest of the evening documenting their weekend retreat. Melissa and Chad in the hot tub, groping each other like teenagers. Ronald making phone calls to arrange my psychiatric evaluation. All three of them toasting their success with champagne that probably cost more than most people's rent. By Sunday morning, I had everything I needed. Photographs, voice recordings, and a detailed plan for how they intended to destroy me. More importantly, I had something they didn't expect. I had nothing left to lose. Around 10 a.m., I made my presence known by walking up to the house and knocking on the front door. Chad answered, wearing a bathrobe and a confused expression that shifted quickly to alarm when he saw me. "Eddie? What are you doing here?" "Thought I'd drop by and see how the work retreat was going. You know, learn about all the business you've been conducting." Behind him, I could see Melissa scrambling to put on clothes, while Ronald shouted something from the kitchen. "You need to leave," Chad said. "This is private property. Actually, this is company property, purchased with corporate funds for business purposes. As an employee, I have every right to be here." I pushed past him into the house, where Melissa stood wrapped in a sheet, her hair disheveled, and her face flushed with embarrassment and anger. "Hello, honey. Having a good time at your business meeting?" "Eddie, please. Let me explain." "Oh, I think I understand perfectly. You're here conducting very important business with your colleagues, the kind of business that requires hot tubs and champagne and sleeping arrangements." Ronald appeared from the kitchen, fully dressed but looking rattled. "You're trespassing, Hartwell. I'm calling the police." "Please do. I'd love to explain to them what kind of business meeting this is." I pulled out my camera and showed them the display screen, scrolling through dozens of compromising photographs. "I've got pictures, voice recordings, and a very interesting conversation about psychiatric evaluations and commitment papers. The police would find all of this fascinating, don't you think?" Chad lunged for the camera, but I stepped aside and let his momentum carry him into the coffee table. He went down hard, scattering magazines and wine glasses across the floor. "Careful there, Chad. Wouldn't want you to hurt yourself. That might interfere with your plans to have me declared mentally unstable." Melissa wrapped the sheet tighter around herself. "Eddie, we can work this out. We can talk about this like adults." "Adults? You mean like the adults who were planning to have me committed to a psychiatric facility so you could steal my son and my house and my life?" "It wasn't supposed to happen like this," she said, and for a moment she sounded like the girl I'd married instead of the stranger she'd become. "No, it was supposed to happen quietly, with me locked away in some institution while you three celebrated your victory. But here's the thing about plans. Sometimes they don't work out the way you expect." I pulled out a small device and pressed a button. Immediately, their voices filled the room, playing back their conversation from the previous evening. The part about the commitment papers, the bought psychiatrists, the plans for my son. Ronald's face went pale. "Where did you get that?" "I told you I maintain this building's systems. That includes the sound system." I'd actually rigged the voice recorder to play through the house's built-in speakers, but they didn't need to know the technical details. "What do you want?" Chad asked, struggling to his feet. "What do I want? I want my wife to look me in the eye and tell me how long she's been planning to betray me. I want my boss to explain why he thinks he can destroy people's lives for sport. And I want you, Chad, to tell me exactly what you thought would happen when you messed with the wrong person." The room fell silent except for the sound of their recorded voices continuing to play, laying out their conspiracy in damning detail. "But most of all," I continued, "I want you to understand that the game has changed. You're not the hunters anymore. You're the prey." The confrontation at the lakehouse ended with me walking away while they scrambled to figure out how much damage I could do with the evidence I'd gathered. I left them there, Melissa crying, Chad nursing his bruised ego and his scraped knees, Ronald making frantic phone calls to lawyers and fixers. But I wasn't done with them, not even close. Monday morning, I didn't go to work. Instead, I went to see a lawyer, not one of the expensive downtown firms that catered to people like Ronald Clay, but a scrappy solo practitioner named Janet Pierce who specialized in employment law and had a reputation for taking on cases that bigger firms wouldn't touch. Janet was about 50, with gray-streaked hair and the kind of direct gaze that comes from years of fighting uphill battles against better-funded opponents. Her office was cramped and cluttered, but her law degree from the state university hung on the wall next to a dozen commendations from worker advocacy groups. "Mr. Hartwell, I've reviewed the materials you sent me," she said, gesturing to a stack of printed emails, photographs, and transcripts. "If even half of this is authentic, you have grounds for several lawsuits: wrongful termination, conspiracy, intentional infliction of emotional distress, possibly even criminal charges. It's all authentic. I can provide the original recordings and digital files for forensic verification. The question is, what do you want to accomplish? These people have money and connections. They'll fight back hard." "I want them destroyed," I said simply. "I want everyone in this town to know exactly who they are and what they've done. And I want my son to understand that his father isn't the weak man his mother thinks he is." Janet smiled grimly. "That, Mr. Hartwell, I can help you with." While Janet prepared legal papers, I put the second phase of my plan into motion. I'd spent Sunday evening creating a comprehensive digital package: the photographs from the lakehouse, the voice recordings of their conspiracy, copies of the forged evidence Chad had planted in my office, and a detailed timeline of their scheme. I uploaded everything to a file-sharing service, then sent the link to every employee at Blackstone Industries, every member of the Millbrook Town Council, the editors of both local newspapers, and the regional television stations. The subject line was simple: the truth about Blackstone Industries' leadership. By Tuesday morning, the story was everywhere. The local TV station led their morning news with "Corporate Conspiracy Exposed," complete with audio clips of Ronald and Chad discussing their plans to have me committed. The newspaper ran a front-page story under the headline, "Executive Affair Scandal Rocks Local Company." But the real damage was happening at the grassroots level. In a town the size of Millbrook, everyone knows everyone else's business, and social media amplified every detail. Melissa's friends were sharing the photographs of her with Chad at the lakehouse. Ronald's golf buddies were discussing his creative use of company funds. Chad's ex-wife was giving interviews about his gambling debts and the real reasons for their divorce. Wednesday afternoon, I was in my lawyer's office when my phone rang. It was Lisa, calling from Murphy's Bar. "Eddie, you need to get down here. Your wife's here, and she's making quite a scene." I found Melissa at the bar, 3 drinks deep, and surrounded by a crowd of curious onlookers. Her perfect corporate composure had cracked, and she was telling anyone who would listen that I'd set her up, that the photographs were fake, that she was the real victim in all of this. "There he is," she shouted when she saw me. "There's my loving husband, the man who's trying to destroy my life." "I'm not trying to destroy your life, Melissa. I'm just showing people who you really are." She stumbled off her bar stool and confronted me, swaying slightly. "You think you're so clever, don't you? You think you've won? I think I've evened the score. You don't understand what you've done. Ronald has connections, Eddie, people who can make your life very difficult. More difficult than having me committed to a psychiatric facility?" The bar went quiet. Even in a town where everyone knew everyone's business, hearing the details laid out so starkly was shocking. "That wasn't my idea," Melissa said, but her voice lacked conviction. "Whose idea was it?" It was It was supposed to be temporary, just until we could work things out. Work what out? How to steal my house? How to turn my son against me? How to erase 15 years of marriage like it never happened? Melissa started crying then, not the delicate tears of a woman seeking sympathy, but the ugly, desperate sobs of someone whose carefully constructed world was falling apart. "I never meant for it to go this far," she said. "It started as just an affair. But then Ronald said we could have everything, that we could start over, that you'd never have to know. But I did know, and now everyone else knows too." She looked around the bar at the faces watching her, some sympathetic, others judgmental, all of them fascinated by the real-time destruction of her reputation. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now you face the consequences of your choices, just like I had to face the consequences of trusting you." Thursday brought news that Blackstone Industries' board of directors had called an emergency meeting. By Friday, Ronald Clay was out as CEO, Chad Morrison was terminated for cause, and the company had issued a public statement distancing itself from their actions. But the best news came Saturday morning, when Jake called me from his aunt's house. "Dad, I saw everything on the news. Are you okay?" "I'm fine, son. Better than fine, actually. I can't believe Mom did all that stuff. I mean, I knew she was acting weird, but I never thought—" "Your mother made some bad choices. That doesn't mean she's a bad person, just that she lost her way." "Are you going to divorce her?" "Probably. Some things can't be fixed, Jake. Can I come home? I want to be there for whatever happens next." "Of course. This is your home too, and it always will be." Sunday evening, Melissa came home to collect her belongings. She looked older somehow, diminished by the weight of public scrutiny and professional ruin. We spoke briefly in the kitchen while she packed her things. "I'm sorry, Eddie, for all of it." "I know you are. Do you think you'll ever be able to forgive me?" I considered the question seriously. "Maybe someday, but not today, and probably not for a long time." She nodded, accepting the judgment. "What about Jake?" "Jake will make his own decisions about his relationship with you. I won't try to influence him either way." "And us?" "There is no us anymore, Melissa. You made sure of that when you decided I was disposable." She finished packing in silence, then paused at the front door. "You're not the same person I married?" she said. "No, I'm not. The person you married was naive enough to believe that playing fair would protect him from people who don't play by the rules. That person is gone. What happens to Ronald and Chad? That depends on the district attorney and the civil courts, but I imagine they'll have plenty of time to think about their choices." After she left, I sat on my front porch with a beer and watched the sun set over the town where I'd spent my entire adult life. Tomorrow, I'd go back to work. The new management had asked me to stay on, with a promotion and a significant raise. Jake would start his senior year of high school living with a father he could respect instead of pity. And somewhere in town, 3 people who'd thought they could destroy me were learning that sometimes the prey fights back. I wasn't the same man who'd woken up in those woods 3 weeks ago. That man had believed in fairness and justice and the basic decency of people he trusted. This man knew better. This man had learned that sometimes you have to become the villain in someone else's story to be the hero in your own, and I was completely fine with that.